Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Tracy Minestra, toko ingoa, he kai whakarite aho, mo te wharetoi, nā rira, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to City Gallery Wellington, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this very, very special talk. It's terrific to welcome you all here. Today is the closing day of the exhibition Eavesdropping, a group exhibition that explores the politics of listening, surveillance, and control. One of the key works in the show, a work that has been playing in this room for the duration of the exhibition, is the audio archive, How Are You Today?, made by the Manus Recording Project Collective. It's a 14-hour-long archive of 10-minute recordings made by men detained on Manus Island by the Australian government. Through this extraordinary archive, we hear the sound of life in limbo. When we learned that this work was going to be shown concurrently in the exhibition The Shouting Valley at Auckland University's Gus Fisher Gallery, and that artist Hoda Afshar was also showing work relating to Manus in that show, we leapt at the opportunity to bring her to Wellington. Born in Tehran, Hoda Afshar moved to Australia in 2007. She lives and works in Melbourne, where she practices as an artist and lectures in photography and fine art. Last year, she won a major Australian art prize for her work, Portrait of Behrouz Boochani, Manus Island. The work she is currently showing in Auckland is the series Remain, also shot on Manus, and made in collaboration with several of the men there, many years after leaving their homelands to seek asylum in Australia, but instead sent to languish in that remote offshore prison. Her work powerfully explores the image as a means of presenting new narratives. It is art, it's activism, it is work that bears witness. And of course, this work has taken on a new and extraordinary and very powerful meaning for us with the remarkable news this week that Behrouz Boochani is in New Zealand. Today, Hoda is in conversation with Murdoch Stephens. Murdoch is a writer, editor, and hugely important campaigner for refugee rights. He led the campaign for New Zealand to double the quota. Behrouz Boochani, one of the subjects of Hoda's portrait series, is a Kurdish journalist, writer, poet, and filmmaker. Behrouz, I'm sure many of you know, was held in Manus Island Detention Centre for over 6 years, where he became the voice of Manus, as well as participating in Hoda's art projects. He's one of the artists who contributed to How Are You Today in the Eavesdropping exhibition. He made a film on his phone from Manus, which played in festivals around the world, including here in New Zealand. And his book, No Friend But the Mountains, Writing from Manus Prison, won Australia's Most Valuable Literary Award earlier this year. In his acceptance speech, sent from exile, Behrouz said, "I've always said that I believe in words and literature. I believe that literature has the potential to make change and challenge structures of power. Literature has the power to give us freedom." Yes, it is true. It certainly is. Behrouz's arrival in New Zealand in secret on Thursday night speaks to that power, the power of words and art to create freedom. That it is his book that brought him here is an absolute testament to the vital role arts organisations like festivals have in being agents for change. Behrouz is in New Zealand as a guest of Word Christchurch. He will give a major talk in Christchurch on November 29, and we are so thrilled and so honoured that he is with us here today. We're going to begin today by watching a section of Hoda's film Remain. Then Behrouz, Hoda and Murdoch will begin their conversation. But for now, please join me in very warmly welcoming our special guest.
I'm Shaminda Kanapati. I'm a Sri Lankan Tamil refugee. I fled my country because of persecution. I have been detained on Manus Island for almost 5 years. The life in Manus Island, there is no word to describe how hard it is. We've been hidden from the world. I have seen many stuff while I'm in Manus Island. People swollen the blade, drunk the shampoos and washing powder. People refused to drink water and no food, and people were doing hunger strike. Oh, everywhere I saw the desperations and people not talking, and I saw one Sri Lankan Tamil refugee who was mentally unwell, and he asked some mental health treatment, but he did not get any proper treatment. So he hung himself to end up his life. We lost a valuable human being in this planet. I feel really guilty on that. I could have done something for him to take some of his burden, but I could not do anything. And I feel really I'm a coward. How do you feel when you lost a brother or lost your father? We all human being, we have a right to live our life with freely. But what's happening on Manus? They don't care. And in fact, they don't care about the men. That's the Australian policy. That's what Manus. That's what's happening here.
Well, kia ora koutou, welcome along. It's so great to have both of you here. There was a little bit of an introduction in that footage about what exactly Manus Island is, but I'd like to start by asking you, Behrouz, to give us some background to what this was for people here who might not know what you've been through.
Yeah, first I would like to say hello to everyone. Manus Island and the whole this policy, I think it's very complicated and it's not easy to understand. Those people who look at those Manus from outside, I think they always, they try to, get information or get some kind of understanding through journalism, which doesn't work, journalism language. And that's why, and also there are some propaganda, by the government around this issue. So that's why it's hard to understand it. But, in my understanding, right now that you watch this, you say that, so these men are free, they are in the jungle, And, in that book, you say, on title that I said Manus Prison, So that's why I think we should look at the history of this policy, because the situation is getting changed, day by day. So just I would like to give you some information, basic information about the history of, this policy in Manus. So this policy actually established on 19 July 2013. So they exiled people to Manus Island and Nauru. We were there for 6 months. And after 6 months, we had a big protest that ended up in a riot. And so they attacked us, the local people, alongside the Australians, officers. Actually, some New Zealanders were there too, so they were working. So they attacked us, and Reza Barati was killed. That man that was mentioned in the work. After 18 months, we had the big hunger strike, which was 800 people participated in that protest. After 12 days, it was completely peaceful because we got a lesson from the first protest. So after 12 days, they arrested the leaders of this protest.
Who was that? Was that you?
Not only me, but we were, about 50 people. So, yes, they sent us to a jail with the local criminals. So we were there, and after a while, so that finished. Then something happened after 3 years. The PNG Supreme Court ordered that keeping people in prison is illegal, and they opened the gates. So we were in a real prison for 3 years. Exactly 3 years we were in a real prison. We were living in 4 prisons that absolutely we were separate from each other, but we were in the same place. So when the court ordered, we still couldn't go out because the prison was located in a Navy base. So they said, if you go out, you are in the Navy base, so we arrest you. So what they did, they put a bus there, and they said you should get in this bus and go to Lorango town, which was 35 kilometers away. So we could get in the bus and go there and just spend some time in the town. It was a small village, then come back. So
this is when Remain was shot while you
no.
were... No?
So we got some kind of freedom. After 4.5 years, they relocated us by force to the 3 prison camps, in Lorango town. So then they demolished the camp, the old prison. So that prison is not exist anymore. So they sent us to 3 places. So we were there for about 2 years, and just 2 months ago, they transferred everyone to Port Moresby, which is the capital city. In fact, they continue to this political game in Port Moresby. So in Manus right now, no one remain. So we work on this project on that time, actually after they relocated us to new places. So that's why after 4.5 years, we could get freedom in the island, And so after more than 6 years, we could get freedom in the capital city. And for me, just, I ended up here.
In the island.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. I feel like we could basically just say welcome for the whole hour. So I'd like to ask you, Hoda, how did you get in contact? How did this process, this collaboration begin with Behrouz?
In general, I have to say that most of my work and my research has always been on looking at different categories of marginality, and what I'm interested in is how these categories are fabricated and on what basis. And it kind of got me into reading the history of post-colonial kind of theories, and then also looking at different sort of started off by looking at my own experience as a woman in Australia coming from an Islamic culture, an Islamic country, and how there's always an image of us that precedes us in the society, in the mind of the society. And where does that image coming from? And looking at the history of photography in relation to kind of fabricating these categories of marginality. And then to me, the different sort of formulas that, there's the same formula applied on different categories, basically. And the refugee sort of figure has always been an interesting kind of being, how, the question is how we can actually accept the fact that our societies can actually place some people outside the borders of the country that we live in, and also keep them subject to its laws, and how they're excluded from the rights of the citizens and so on. And when Behrouz started writing from Manus Island, about what's going on over there. And at first it was quite anonymously. You couldn't publish things under your name. And
for 2 years.
For 3 years. And when PEN America acknowledged him as a journalist, he found the courage to publish the articles under his name. And I was following his writings, and I was also like quite shocked by the fact that the Australian society is not doing anything about it. And when they closed the camps and they were forcing them to the new facilities, I saw Behrouz on television, and I always say that, like, I find it really hard to describe what it was, but because my father was a Kurdish man too, and there's something quite, Kurdish people are quite well known as people who actually are really hard to break, and they always hold their heads up, and they're famous for their resistance, basically. And I saw that familiar sense in Behrouz's face. He was exhausted, starved, and tired, but he was on television begging the Australian society to hear them. And it was in that moment that I thought, like, you know what, I speak his language, and I'm an artist, I have a small platform, probably I can do something about this. And I didn't really expect it to go anywhere beyond my sort of a small art community in Melbourne, or let's say Australia. I tried to get in contact with Behrouz, and I found Omi Tofirian, his translator, and he got in contact with Behrouz, and then he got back to me and he said, Behrouz looked you up and he's happy to work with you. And it was I was like, great. And then
Did you turn down a lot of people? Did other people say?
He's pretty selective.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, we're lucky then.
I was like, lucky. So I remember the first WhatsApp message that I sent to him, and he was like, this is going to be hard because we have to send voice messages, and it's going to be kind of like slow. We couldn't directly kind of like talk because the internet's pretty slow there. So I think
it's slow here too.
Yeah.
It's just New Zealand, so.
At first I wanted to go straight away, and Behrouz was like, no, you need to wait. And I've been waiting for an artist to come to Manus for 5 years, and now you're coming. I need to educate you about the history of this place before you come. You need to know a lot. And so basically we spoke for 4 or 5 months, and I think we exchanged more than 1 million voice messages. And Behrouz was sending me chapters of his book before it was like published, and all the articles that he wrote. And it got to a point that I read everything about Manus Island and Nauru, and he was like, I think you're ready to come to us, to Manus. But we knew that, like, it's my application would get rejected if I apply on arrival as a photographer. And Behrouz told me that they're not going to let you in. So we kind of like planned it. I faked a whole trip as a tourist to Port Moresby. I arrived at the airport with the biggest grin on my face. Hello, I can't wait to see the volcanoes, and I love this country, which I do. It's a really beautiful country. And the guy at the airport was so happy that I'm so excited. So they gave me the visa. And next day I jumped on the next flight to Manus, and Behrouz arranged for someone to pick me up, and then one of the locals put me in one of his apartments. But by the time I got there, Australian immigration realized that I'm there. So they sent people to stalk me everywhere and listen to our conversations and so on. And do you want me to tell the rest, or if you have other questions?
Yeah, I do. I swear I do have other questions. Definitely prepared for this.
Sure.
I mean, you're an artist and you're a writer. I kind of would like to give you a chance to talk about the kind of, like, the ideas behind the stills from the film, which is, I don't know if you've done, I don't think you've done film before.
Nothing on that scale, no.
So I'm interested in asking both of you, but we'll start with you, Hoda, since you've been speaking on this topic.
Yeah.
Like some of the visual language behind what you were trying to capture there.
Basically, one of the things that I wanted to do was to not picture a refugee behind the bars. And one of the, like, Behrouz and I talked a lot about how because both our backgrounds are in documentary and journalism, and we both lost trust in it, and especially in kind of like telling the stories of refugees and how people in the society became absolutely immune to the images of like suffering, and people like we don't see the humanity of those individuals in the media. What we see is a mass group of people who are seeking asylum, and they're often presented as like a threat to the sanctity of the community, the society. And our politicians keep telling us like that they're dangerous criminals, they're terrorists, we have to kind of like keep the borders safe and so on. So they demonize the image of the refugee, and the word refugee is pregnant with so many heavy meanings, and from like something that is reducing them to basically either a number, or it's just like their humanity is taken away from them. And Behrouz told me when we were talking on the phone, he said, throughout these years, I've been watching, a lot of photographers came here, journalists, and I actually helped them on the kind of like trip, and I always watch them and how they work. What they do, they normally put a refugee in front of a camera, they ask sensitive questions. As soon as they break into tears, they take a photograph, they leave. And it's never about the subject, the person in the photo, it's about the photographer who made that image. So we talked a lot about how we can actually avoid doing that.
And film was the answer to that.
Film, like when I realized the complexity of this narrative, I realized that photography by itself cannot actually tell this story. I need something that can include their voices, their narrative, and so on. But what we wanted to, basically that's a methodology that I developed throughout the years of my practice, that I use performance as a method to kind of like give the autonomy and agency back to the subject matter, to also make it clear to the audience that the subject is an active part of the making process. And so the theatricality also is something that is a kind of like way of criticizing documentary storytelling.
That's so interesting, the contrast between that and the change that you went through going from a journalist to a writer. Was there a sense?
No, actually, 40 years, all of my work, in journalism and, cinema or, literature, all of these works, if we look at them, I always try to introduce the new perspective, towards the refugees, because, the current language and perspective in Western countries, society towards the refugees is that we have two kind of perspective. First is, the leftist people or the people who care about human rights, or, they have a very romantic perspective toward the refugees, and they look at the refugees and treat the refugees in a way that they are like angel, and but in other side, the racist people or right-wing people, they look at the I don't know that it was the right word.
No, it's perfect.
Yeah, okay.
It's too honest.
They look at the refugees, they categorize them, alongside terrorists or, dangerous people, criminals. So my works, I try to challenge both perspectives, because both of them are wrong,
Yeah.
The refugees are human, same as others. So we are not angel. In this book, if you read this book, you can see many characters. They are human beings, so they are not perfect people. They are not angel. And other side, they are not dangerous people. Simple people, like others. So what I did, and I actually work and with Hoda, so we try to work in this way to challenge this perspective and create a language to represent our situation, you know. So journalism language is a kind of, I'm a journalist, you know, and still work as a journalist, you know. I'm not against journalism, I'm against the current journalism language, you know, which is a language that is actually follow the, you know, language of power structure, the language of government, you know, because they created their language to keep us in, you know, in that place and convince this policy to the public, you know, through that. For example, they, you know, they say to that place offshore processing center, you know, which is ridiculous. Which kind of offshore processing? You are torturing people there, and many people died there and killed by your system. And you know, you damage people, and you say offshore processing center. And unfortunately, the media use that word, you know. But you know, that's why I try to, you know, I rename it prison. Although prison is not the right word for this, you know.
Right, because you're not criminals.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. There are many
Because it's
different
completely
things.
legal.
Yeah.
To do what you did.
So, you know, I think what Hoda did was that she exactly worked in this way, you know, to, you know, create a new language.
So
know,
art was able to do something that
Yeah,
journalism
definitely.
could
So
no longer do.
yeah. So I received some, you know, feedback from people who, you know, read this book or look. They said I was following Manus news for years, and just now I can understand, you know. So it seemed that they couldn't understand through journalism,
But
and
can I add
it is
something to-
what just one. You know, there is a philosophy, you know, in the education system, in journalism. They said each story at least has two sides, you know. In Manus, there is only one side, which is our side, because the government is killing people, is torturing people, and you cannot justify this. You know, when you give this opportunity, this chance to the government, you know, and government is, you know, you cannot compare government with some men who are in a remote prison and they don't have platform. You know, when you give this chance to the government to, you know, justify this, you know, that doesn't work. You know, so that's why I think we should challenge this language. So what Hoda did with this work is that you can see, you know, even in her you know, portrait, you know.
It's behind you, right there.
Yeah, that one. You know,
The prize-winning one, the amazing.
Yeah, the prize is not important. You know? It's not important. I think I should say something about that because now we are in a gallery. You know, you know, people know me through this book, but in my view, I think it is only a small part of my works. You know, my movie is important than this. You know.
It's
But-
more important?
Yeah, but didn't get awards, so people don't watch it.
You can get it on, you can rent
I
it on
know,
video, right?
yeah, and you know, this movie reached to many international festivals, you know, but still in Australia, you know, people, you know, just some
But
people
I think
know
your book
it.
is better than your film.
At the end of this, I'm going to ask you both
No,
what's
Oh, another
next,
thing
but
we disagree on.
Yeah, so no, sorry, I talk a lot. Just I should say that this award actually, you know, it's dangerous. This awards culture, you know, and I think, yeah, in some ways is
the
dangerous.
award culture is
yeah,
dangerous.
And
You got
that-
out of this torture prison and it's the
But
awards
come
culture.
on, Behrouz, like I think it's also like really important because it's like basically what you want to do with your art, that you think you're going to reach a small audience and those small steps are quite important, right? And it was like those little steps that you and your small number of friends around you took towards like kind of like bringing the world's attention to the
No, I am
issue
happy
of-
that I got that
and
award.
like you winning,
Of course.
you winning that prize was
No,
kind
I'm
of like
happy
made it
about
100
that. Yeah,
times
it's
bigger.
fine.
And
I
like
thought we were
winning
talking
the
about Hoda's prize.
Yeah.
But
About this.
also like this
yeah,
image,
this
winning the
portrait.
prize,
Yeah.
gave an image to a name that was
Yeah.
like quite well known, and people were like looking at some of your photos, which were like kind of like taken quite objectively and wasn't giving anything about you to the audience. But you agreed that this is like also a lot of you is reflected in it, right? And like by putting this image up there and also winning the prize, like all of a sudden people felt quite connected to you, right? Like, so I think the awards are important when there's political activism involved, because it's also helps you to move one step forward, not in terms of, maybe you're talking about the money value. The money value probably is not that important. It's important in helping me to develop my career, you develop your career. But in that sense, like in helping to get the voice out there, it helps a lot.
Yeah, okay, let me say something about this. So this portrait, I think it's very, different, and, it's only one of them. How many photos did you take? 10 or 9, I think, from the men.
From the
all
men
of
on-
the men in Manus,
They're like,
in that project.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Like I can.
So, this work for the other journalists, I describe in this book, when they exiled us to Manus Island, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, in the airport in Christmas Island, there were some photographers and journalists. So we were completely, powerless. I was one of those people. So my name was MEG 45, a number that was exiled to, they were exiling him to a remote prison, remote island. So on that time, the photographer was just taking photo, without getting permission, without just caring, when you take photo from a chair.
You name them as vultures in your book.
Yeah, so what I say is that we should challenge this kind of behavior, because we are human, and have this right actually to use your camera as a weapon, So for that photographer, camera is a camera, and he or she's taking a photo just to publish it or, for anything. But for me, that I am subject, I am absolutely, passive in front of this, and powerless. And the camera is like a weapon on me, For he is like this, for me is like this.
It was very clear in that section in the book. That
Yeah,
this is
so
the point
that's
where,
yes.
where journalism was no longer liberating. I want to take it back to that link.
Yeah, but
between
in this
journalism-
work is different. In this work, actually the subject, I have
Has
written an
yeah.
article about this,
Thank
you know.
you.
The subject,
Who was it for, so the audience can check it out later? Who
The
published
Saturday
it?
paper.
the Saturday paper, what?
Yeah.
And he wrote an article on his image after the winning the
Yeah,
prize.
and that
which-
is
the
interesting.
name
that-
of the article is This is a Human?
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is a human.
This is
You know, so in this work, even the subject, which is me, is a part of the, creation process, For example, what is that photo? We created some smoke, fire, and actually she asked me that,
That's an actual fire.
yeah, that which elements do you want? And I
Yeah.
said fire, and she said why? I said because fire is like a Kurdish culture, element, and it's very big thing in,
So this
we
is good,
Kurdish
because this was
people,
my question.
yeah, when we see actually fire, we become happy,
But can I also
Yeah,
add
yeah.
something to this, because it was
Yeah,
like,
okay.
I wish
Sorry, I talk a lot, but yeah, I really
because at the beginning Behrouz said I want an octopus, because he wanted the octopus to represent the Australian government, and he wanted it to sit on his head. And he was like, but I'm going to look through it. And we sent the fishermen for 2-3 days to look for an octopus, and they couldn't find any. And then
Probably for the best.
actually, towards the end when we finished shooting, because I was there for 9 days, and on the last day, we almost forgot to take Behrouz's portrait. And then as we were I was like, Behrouz, what about you? We didn't take your portrait. And he was like, oh yeah. And I was like, we don't have an octopus, what should we do? And then it was like fire, because the idea behind the portraits was also I remember the first day, Behrouz brought a group of Kurdish men with him to the island for the beginning, because he said it's easier for you can talk to them in their language, and also you can develop what you want to do, and then we get into the men from other nationalities. And we were sitting around, I don't know if you remember it, and I was explaining to them that, the Australian government has made you invisible and made your voice inaudible. I'm gonna take your portraits out to the streets, put it on billboards, make it as big as possible. And they were like, yay! And I was like, okay, the process is that I want you to pick something, a natural element, as a metaphor that expresses your emotions and feelings best. And they went all quiet. And then Martin, your friend, said something in Kurdish, and everyone started laughing. And I was like, what is he saying? And then Behrouz was he's saying what language he's speaking in. And because I was using the language of art, metaphor, natural elements, and they were like, what does that mean? And I'm like, I'm so sorry. We get so used to this kind of jargons. And then when I explained what it means, and then they got excited, everyone started picking, I want water, I want bird, I want chicken, I want fire and soil, and so on. And
So chicken was one of them?
Chicken is... we were talking about how... that's... Yes, true. We were talking about a bird that cannot fly, to sort of represent this idea of desiring freedom, but not being able to fly. And also the idea of freedom attacking you from the back, because what happened with Mohammed when we got on the boat to go to the other island, as soon as he saw the water on the boat, he started crying. And he said, this is the first time I'm seeing the ocean after all these years, and it's too beautiful, I cannot handle it. By the time we got to the other island, his whole body was covered in red rash, and he was shivering. And it was really hot over there, around 40, 45 degrees, but he was shivering, and I was really worried. And a friend of his told us that it's okay, sometimes it happens for some of us. When we face a little bit of freedom, it shocks us and we get ill. He will be okay tomorrow. And in the morning when he woke up, he was like, I'm ready for the photo shoot, and he was fine. And that's why we decided to kind of use this idea of freedom attacking you. And so there were all these kind of conversations throughout the making process that was happening between us. And yeah.
Thanks. That's I have a couple of questions left before we open it up to some Q&A. One thing I really found fascinating in your book, and I know a lot of the people in the audience will too, was the link between Kurdish independence struggles that motivated your journalism in Iran with the way that you theorized. You're basically the world expert on the Manus prison. Can you talk a little bit about the links between your view of the world from Kurdistan to the view of the world from Manus prison?
Yeah, I think, when they exiled me to Manus, it was clear for me at the beginning that the whole this policy is, established on base of colonialism mentality, and it's like a classical colonialization, now that you can see that they are using that land very, obviously for their political benefits, and that actually that octopus, so we can talk about that too. It is a good term, that Australia is like an octopus.
Octopus,
And
yeah.
octopus,
Yeah.
octopus, yeah. And is actually is impacting the Pacific Ocean countries, in this area. And
Because
New
of the
Zealand.
tentacles, right?
Yeah, so what's happening in Christchurch, we can't talk about that too, So, this whole policy is this, and for me, as a Kurd, Kurdistan is a place that, is with a long history of struggle, long history of struggle to, keep Kurdish identity alive, and to get, or establish political, structure. So it's not necessary that you own your country, I mean, that own your land, you can do it in the federalist system. So I'm not talking about that. Just, I mean, the long history of this, So it is very similar for me between the resistance in Manus and the resistance which is in the history of Kurdistan. And that's why I used, in all of these works, here, there is a Kurdish songs, we have some Kurdish elements in this.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, a lot actually. In the movie, Choka, Please Tell Us the Time, actually it is, there are many Kurdish elements. In this book, the title is No Friend But the Mountains, which is a Kurdish,
Saying.
yeah, that Kurds no have friend, but the mountain. All of this, so, and just one thing, all of these works, in Kurdistan, the resistance in Manus is to keep identity, and, introduce your identity. In Manus, the whole system design just to take your identity, take your freedom, take your individuality, And in Hoda works, in this work, you can see that this photo, this portrait, Hoda didn't reduce people, In other people, other journalists, they reduce people, just to get some sympathy, get sympathy and look and show the refugees only as a victim, So in this source, I think what is important in Hoda's work.
Thank you, Behrouz.
I think there's a quote there for your portfolio.
I know, right?
I love it.
Someone taking
No,
notes.
really, you can see, that these people have identity, Of course, you can't see, you can't feel emotion towards these people because they are in a very bad, inhuman circumstances,
But I think the best way to describe it, which is like kind of like connects the book with you and I talked a lot about it, that how like the language is quite similar, but like you use the same language in the writing, and I use it in like image making, which is like the language of beauty and poetry, basically, which is what we both have in common, and which is the opposite of the language of documentary that you were
exactly.
criticizing, because the way that like documentary work is now made, which you were actually like talking about, you have a problem with how it's used now, not anything against journalism or documentary, but how it's being used now, is that it's very objective. Like the photographer's told to kind of like avoid having any personal kind of like emotional references in there, or like it's about like capturing what's in front of you, because we're told that what's in front of us and captured objectively reflects truth, right? But that's also kind of like what's lacking in that kind of work. That's why we don't feel anything anymore towards those people. Not that in these photographs, like you actually get to know these individuals, but you feel something. There's something tangible, something poetic, something beautiful. And beauty is a language that We all share, like, doesn't matter where we're from which country, we all connect to beauty. And that's what connects us to the humanity of these individuals. In the film, when you see a young man singing so passionately against the sky with his eyes shut, like, you can't help but feel really connected to that young man and feel his pain and his suffering. But that's what's missing in kind of like reportage that you see in the news, that we see like drone images of like boats arriving in the Mediterranean Sea, and like it's like a fear that all these people are coming to our countries and they're going to take our jobs, our tax money is going to be spent on them, and like, oh my God, we don't have enough space for them, like there must be a lot of rapists amongst them, dangerous criminals and so on. And it's not just something that is happening in Australia, it's happening everywhere in the world. Now, like, the Mediterranean Sea has turned into the biggest graveyard in the world. And Europe's making, like, arresting people who are saving lives at the sea, you know? Like, people are not allowed to save drowning refugees in the ocean because it's criminalized. Like, this is the time that we're living in, this is the world that we're living in, and it's quite scary, you know?
So this is maybe a good time to bring things back to the local, to New Zealand. There's a lot of people I know in the audience. Some of the people cheering and hollering before had been following this for a long time. There were protests outside the Australian High Commission every year since Reza Barati friend was murdered. I wonder what you think, given you're here now, New Zealand, both at the governmental and the citizen level, ought to be thinking about and doing to help end the detention of people in PNG and Nauru.
Should I answer?
If you want to, if you feel comfortable with it. If you don't,
Yeah,
that's...
no, it's fine. I think, you know, New Zealand for years, many times, you know, offered to take 150 people of men in Manus or in Nauru. You know, many times they offered this and put it on the table, and Australia just refused. And I think people of New Zealand, or you know, some of the people here, you know, look at this offer and you know, in some ways proud of it, because we see Australia. You know, many people in Australia blame Australia when they compare Australia with New Zealand. They say, oh, New Zealand wants to take these people, but you refuse. But I think we should say something. We are close to the parliament, I think.
Let's
Yeah.
go there.
So we should say something, yeah.
No, I say, so it is a, yeah, so it's
You want me
better
to
I don't
it?
say.
Sometimes it's easier if other people...
No, it's, yeah, we are in a liberal democracy, you know. Yeah, so, you know, New Zealand, actually New Zealand have got, you know, so much positive credit by this offer internationally and in Australia and, you know, in the region and for its people, you know, and even among the refugees there, you know. So now if you go and ask the refugees there, you know, they feel very positive about New Zealand and they love New Zealand. But in fact, New Zealand, you know, did nothing. You know, New Zealand got credit by doing nothing.
Right.
You know,
You're the only one who's here so far from this, I believe.
yeah, still I'm here. So they are.
And you did
they
that
put
yourself,
a statement
right?
that they are not
With
going
some
to
proof.
extend my, you know, visa. So it's
They'll
fine.
understand it.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to talk about myself, you know. I'm talking about this offer, you know. And they actually, Australian government, when is under too much pressure, because when someone died in Manus or something happened in Australia, the public put pressure on them that you should accept New Zealand offer, you know, they said, okay, we consider it, you know, we consider it. Then after few days, after few weeks, they say, no, it is not the right time, we don't want, you know. They use this offer just to continue to this policy, And in other side, New Zealand said, we want to take these people, and Australia, no. Then they say, okay.
So we should go to PNG and Nauru and
Yeah, so I think New Zealand should do something for people, because already got so much credit,
we should spend the credit.
Yeah. Really, so much credit for doing nothing, for doing nothing. And that's why, you should pay this cost, I think, because it's actually created a positive picture about your country internationally. And, if you go, ask people who follow this policy, oh, New Zealand is a very peaceful country, New Zealand is a very lovely country, it's good, and it is actually a part of national interest, If you have a positive picture internationally, more tourists come to your country, more people, care about you, people love your country, when your people go to other countries, they welcome you, they treat you well, and I think that's why New Zealand should do something. And
I totally agree.
And the best way is that New Zealand should go, because Australia said we don't want these people. And the other side say that we don't let them go to New Zealand or other countries. When you don't accept people, you don't have this right to say,
where to go.
To order to other countries that you cannot take these people. And that's why I think New Zealand should go and have a directly negotiation with PNG and Nauru and take some people there. And one thing, sorry, I talk a lot, if really New Zealand care about human rights, I'm talking about this offer. So why your government don't take 100 people, refugees in Indonesia who are stuck there? Go and take 100 people from there.
I can give you the long refugee policy answer, but how about we move on?
Okay.
So to finish up before we get into Q&A time, I'm curious, as a writer and as a photographer, what's next for you? Are you writing anything else?
Not now, but I'm not going to write about Manus anymore. In literature or art. It's finished for me.
Finished.
Yeah, it's finished.
Film.
Yeah.
About Manus is finished, but like a short story maybe about.
No, I already, when sometimes I was alone in the camp. Sometimes I wrote, for example, like a love letter just for no one. Some poetry, this kind of thing, So I think perhaps
one of the things that I've been encouraging Behrouz to do is to gather all those love letters that he wrote for no one. The day that I arrived on Manus, like the first meeting him and I had, he was like, we were sitting in a balcony drinking tea for 10 hours straight and just talking. And he started reading me those poems, and it's mind-blowing. And they're all in Farsi, and I'm sure Omid can translate them. One of them was written for his pillow, which I made this portrait in response to that. And it's like the pillow as the mother, as the lover, as the friend, and it's just a desire to be held by someone, which can be a friend or mother. And there was another one that you wrote for your umbrella, the first umbrella that you bought, because for years, the rain on Manus is very heavy, and it's impossible to walk under the rain because it's just pouring. And he always dreamed of having an umbrella, but the poem is about the first umbrella that he buys, and then he decides to not use it. And it's all about protecting you, but then you miss the touch of the rain on your body. It's just all of them are fascinating.
Wow. It sounds amazing.
So
one
day, I will. No, just I should collect them and just one day.
So you're gonna.
But I'm not going to write about Manus and do any artwork. It's finished, and I'm not going to.
You've written about it.
It's enough,
The job is done.
Yeah, but about Manus and this policy, I work with the researchers and with academic people, with the universities, and I will read more and study about the history of, Australia, history of colonialization in these, Pacific countries. And because I believe that Manus and Nauru didn't come up just suddenly, has some historical roots, and so that's why, in future I will work, and perhaps, if I have this chance and opportunity, I published a book or 2 books, I don't know. But in literature and, art, it's finished for me, I am tired of 2 words, refugee and Australia. It's enough.
All right. I think we don't do the clap now. We'll do questions and answers first.
Sure.
I kind of wanted to turn it around and be like, you've been asked so many questions. I was wondering if you had questions for the audience, but that's probably a bit ad hoc. Do you have questions for New Zealand? Maybe Hoda can answer.
I don't
No?
know.
He has no questions. He's very happy. Has anyone in the audience got anything they would like to ask? Karam.
Well, that was great. Thank you very much. I'm Syrian, and my wife is Iranian. She's also half Kurdish, so I know what you guys are talking about. So for me, as a Syrian, when the uprising started, I had to leave the country as well. My own family basically traveled to 5 different countries. So one in Hungary, the other in Germany, my father in the United States, my mom in Canada, and I'm here in New Zealand. And I always keep thinking about the ideal immigration policy. What do you think is the ideal immigration policy? I mean, on the one hand, it's terrible to break families up this way. It's so sad. But on the other hand, I guess if Australia says refugees are welcome, millions of people will be there. In a couple of days, or maybe like over a year. What's the ideal migration policy? I guess that's the question that you guys have thought of.
To be honest, I'm not a politician, so I don't know how to write policies. But one thing that I am personally critical of is the fact that the cause of a lot of the chaos and wars and conflict in our regions is the interference of the Western world, the first world countries. And historically, the first world countries has always tried to maintain this kind of like hierarchy between like geographies. They kind of like, if you look at the history, it's like their influence has always maintained us in a kind of like secondary position to the first world. And now you see like Trump going around the world selling weapons of mass destruction, encouraging war. And if they're doing that, they have to take responsibility for what they're causing. And they can't benefit from the conflict that they're creating in those areas and then close the doors to the people who are fleeing, those who can actually survive and leave the country, you know. The reason that I am critical of the Australian government and also the Western countries is because of that. But in terms of what is the best policy, I'm not a politician, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think, it is a very, very good question, and actually we are victims of this question, that already was justified by the Australian government, and it's good we, try to find a different answer, because Australian government asked this question and answer it, and just, give it to the public and people accept it, But we should think about this, what the Australian government, because I am talking about Australia now, particularly, is that, I don't say that, just open the border and everyone come, 1 million. I don't say that. So any country has this right to, process, and it is according to international convention that you should process people to know who they are and why did they leave their countries, What I said, Australia can do it in, Indonesia. There is some process there, process people and take some people from there, the refugees who already accepted. But one thing I would like to say, no one should be able to justify, you know, violation of human rights, you know, because of, because we came to Australia and we seek asylum, and they exile us, and they torture us, and they kill some people, and they took our lives for 6 years, and they justify this. We should never allow and let the government, such as Australia, to be able to justify this. You no have right to do this. You find another solution if you if you want, but you cannot kill people. And just one thing, Australian government, actually, it is a international problem right now. That there is we are facing a state terrorism. It's state terrorism is that the governments around the world hide themselves behind of morality. Australia said that we save lives on the ocean. That's why we keep these people here. You are killing these people. Oh, you care about humanity. Turkish army attacked north of Syria and said, and named the operation, named the war, Peace Spring. It is we are facing this, in the world. Yeah, how you name a war, name war peace.
Yeah.
And and you try to justify this.
Yeah.
And now, in Australia we can't see this. And the last thing, they keep people in those islands, because of different reasons. It's not because of the boats who are going to come. The main reason they stop the boats is that they send the boats back. Any boat that come to Australia, they have agreement with Sri Lanka and Indonesia and send them back. So they keep us there because of 3 reasons. I have think about this for more than 6 years, that why they keep us here. Because of 3 reasons. First, political benefits. The Home Affairs Minister of Australia, he became the immigration minister. He became the most powerful minister in the history of Australia, just because of this policy. So if you be a politician and you be in his position, what do? You say, I keep my power. Why should I let them go? Why should I solve this problem? The second thing, and it is for him and also for the Liberal Party, they used us close to the election, always they used us, and as like a political tools. Or the third reason, and they put Labour Party in a defensive position. They said, if you vote to Labour, the boats attack our country,
Yeah.
and make people scared. And third is ideological reason. Some people are sadists, they enjoy.
Say this, did you say?
Sadists,
Sadists,
yeah, they enjoy, they enjoy that, these people are suffering.
Yeah.
They enjoy.
The politicians, or are we talking
Politicians
the border
and
guards?
public.
Yeah.
Like the ones who comment on your Twitter. There are so
Someone
many.
from Denmark sent me a message that I want to kill you. I say, you come to Manus Island. Just you search it and just come to Manus Island. And if you find me, kill me.
But back to your question, I think, there must be ways of kind of like creating more peace. Like the amount of money and energy that goes into creating conflict can be sort of like reversed. So no one wants to leave their home countries. None of us wants to be away from the land that we were born in. None of us wants to be apart from their family members. The reason that we're here is because of those kind of like unequal geographies that the Western world has created, basically, and for their own benefit. And Australia recently backed up Trump on the war in Persian Gulf, on Iran. Do we really need another war in the world? And Iran is a big country with more than 80 million people. Can you imagine if they start a war, which is like very likely every second in Iran? People are like, I just got back from there and my entire family's life is just staring at television, waiting for the news of war. Like, when it's going to happen, now, tomorrow? Everyone's scared. Like, for more than a year now, they've been just watching television. And so if that happens, we have another at least 40, 50 million people on boats trying to reach somewhere safe. And can the world afford it? Why do like all these countries are supporting that? Why America's insisting on it? Why UK is supporting it? Why Australia is supporting it? So if they're doing that, basically, we have to kind of like, they have to take responsibility for the lives that arrive here on boat too, you know? It's not our problem.
I think that might be all the time we have for questions. So I think Tracy's going to wrap up, but I'd just like to thank you both so much for coming here.
Thank you.
If everyone could give them a